Hello and welcome to Moving Kentucky Forward. I'm Bruce Maples, publisher of Forward Kentucky. This year we have statewide elections and everybody knows about the governor's race at the top, but the down ballot ticket is also important and the Democrats have some amazingly strong candidates for all of the offices. One of those that I have been so impressed with is Kim Reeder, who is running for state auditor. I have looked forward to interviewing her for a few weeks. And I think you're going to be just as impressed as I am once you hear her backstory and hear her qualifications and know why you should vote for her in November. Let's hear from Kim Reeder. So we're here today with Kim Reeder, a well-known tax attorney and who is running for auditor of the state of Kentucky. Ms. Reeder, welcome to Moving Kentucky Forward.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be joining you.
I have to admit that I didn't know much about you before you started running. And then I went and read some things on your website and talked to some people. And I have to say, you have a pretty interesting and impressive background. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with your life up to this point?
Well, thank you for those very kind words, first of all. So I was born and raised in Rowan County. I don't come from a particularly privileged background. One detail I like to give people an idea of my background is my mother was one of 11 children, and she was the first in her family to graduate from high school. But education was very important to my mother. She knew that education was the way that we made our lives better, that we had more security and stability. And so she had very high expectations and hopes for me. And I earned an undergraduate degree from Yale and then went on to do my graduate work at Duke and a law degree at the University of North Carolina. I like to say that I never cheered for either one of their basketball teams. So, and then practiced in tax law, specifically state and local tax law, for almost 20 years. And then in 2014, my mom was diagnosed, my mom was in Moorhead at the time. She was diagnosed with an early onset form of dementia. And so my daughter Ansley and I moved back to Moorhead, and we were able to spend more time with her in the last year of her life. And after she passed away, we had to decide what we wanted to do. And I looked around the community and we decided we'd stay in Moorhead. And my daughter Ansley became the third generation of women in my family graduating from Rowan County High School. And I taught at Rowan County High School, and I taught communications and coached the speech team and taught in the Governor's Scholars Program. And also, while handling some cases, tax cases part-time, I argued in front of the Iowa Supreme Court and a California Court of Appeal. And then, looked around at ways that I could serve in a larger capacity. And I thought my skill set was very well matched for the auditor's role. So I decided to take this on as a challenge.
Well, as I said, that's a very impressive background. And the fact that you did, let's face it, Yale, Duke, UNC, that's not exactly chopped liver schools right there. So congratulations on working through all of those and bringing all of that back to the state of Kentucky. I'm really fascinated by the fact that you decided to teach at the high school. I imagine that was a little bit different experience than doing tax law.
What it started as a good friend asked me she taught the AP language classes at Rowan County, and she asked me to come in and teach a book group. And so I purchased a book and would come in, and we'd read the book, right? And,
Right.
we'd talk, to have a discussion group. And one of the last sessions, I said to her, "Oh my gosh, I've enjoyed this so much. I really have enjoyed interacting with your students." And she said, "Well, I just found out that I'm going to be having a baby in the fall. I'm looking for a long-term substitute. I mean, I know probably that's not even something you'd consider. Would you consider that?" And I said, "Actually, I would." So I became, my first teaching experience was as her long-term substitute.
Sure.
And so I really enjoyed working with students. I really enjoyed students in that age group. As a matter of fact, you could see on social media many of my campaign help it's my former students.
Sure.
So yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about this race. Just so everybody knows, who is your opponent?
Allison Ball.
Right. She is jumping over to auditor from treasurer. So why auditor? I mean, I think I know, but why don't you explain why that particular office looked like one you could or should run for?
Right. So what the auditor does is the auditor, in a big picture description, shines a light on where tax dollars are spent to make sure money, the books are straight, money goes where it's supposed to go, and everyone follows the rules for how it's all accounted for. And, certainly as a partner in one of the big four accounting firms, and also as a tax partner in large law firms, I was responsible for leading client engagement teams, but also understanding financial details so I could make recommendations to, professionals within corporations, right? As far as financial statement issues. So that the very complicated way of saying that my skill set, what I've done professionally, is a good match for what the auditor does. And I see the opportunities within the auditor's office. Of course, there's the focus on financial transactions and accounts and making sure all of that is accounted for properly. There's also an aspect of the auditor's office that involves performance, the ability to evaluate the performance of spending agencies. And that is a tool that many may remember Ed Hatchett, Crit Llewellyn, certainly, Adam Evelyn, that those were Crit Llewellyn in particular. She, if you just count how many performance audits were conducted when she was in office. She, for example, looked at adult education, I think 136 different school boards of education to evaluate whether adult education grants were being used properly. And that was done under the performance audit, area, under that sort of piece of the statute. And so even though the auditor, people, it's dry, it's not really something that maybe people understand what it does. It really, there's the power to make government work better in that role, work more efficiently, give people information about about complicated processes that they might not otherwise have, and that impacts everyday Kentuckians' lives. And so to know that I have a skill set that fits within this role and I could put it to use for Kentuckians, that was just a very attractive idea to me.
It has often seemed to me that an auditor, I dealt with auditors in the corporate world. The audit department was not always our favorite people.
Mm.
because they would, roll in there and say, okay, you got to change the way you're doing this.
Sure.
But I've always thought that audit people, to be a really good auditor, you had to have a pretty good sniffer. You had
Mm.
to be able to sniff it out and say, no, no, this doesn't look right. This smells. There's something wrong here.
Right.
And I have to admit, the keep the book straight and make sure there's not graft and so on and so forth. Yeah, I get that. The
Mm.
performance audit piece, I frankly had forgotten about.
Yeah,
And
that's in the statute.
I think that's one of those things that you can really talk about, that you could say,
Sure.
look, my job is to make sure that your money is being spent well by whomever. And I think,
Right. Right. Well, and that's for one example that I use is that towards the end of June, Kentucky released its first ever statewide data report on domestic violence. And
mhm,
the statistics that were reported were very high for both men and women. For the rate of women, it's around 46% who will experience intimate partner violence or stalking during her lifetime, and it's the performance audit power. Just as an example, one could evaluate whether prevention efforts or
mhm.
intervention efforts, whether those were being used effectively, right? And whether what are the procedures that exist for that.
Mhm.
And so it's and that, when we think about that, that's something that has that has wide reaching impact and the ability to make people's lives better.
So I want to ask you to do something. So I would like for you to, as an English teacher, compare and contrast uh, your abilities and what you bring to the table with what Allison Ball brings to the table. Now, she's an R, you're a D. Okay, we get that. But if you were standing two people up and you didn't know their names and you didn't know their party, what would be the pros for you and what would be the pros for her or cons for her? How would you
Well,
compare? How would you contrast the two of you?
well, if I may take liberty with your question, what I'll do first, we'll start with what I would say about myself, right? I like to focus on myself and what I bring to the table. I feel certain that um, I am exceptionally well qualified to do the job of auditor. My educational background, my professional background is just well suited for this job. Actually, even the fact that I chose the role of auditor, to your question earlier, show you get a little bit of insight into how my mind works, right?
Mhm.
I look for good fits. I'm a I'm a good fit for the role. I don't I've not run for office before. And the auditor is someone, the statute asks the auditor, not asks, demands that the auditor be independent and disinterested. In many states, in fact, the auditor is a nonpartisan role.
Mhm.
I, I am, of course, I'm running as a Democrat. But I don't come with what I maybe describe as political baggage,
Mhm.
meaning that as far as the roles that I would be performance and roles in the past that I would have to weigh as auditor. I really come to the table with the ability to just do the job. That's what I bring to the table. The skills and the ability to be, I think, independent. And it is difficult for someone who serves in an office that the auditor can audit. Just as one example, it's difficult to make a similar argument as far as independence, I think.
Mhm.
And it's all, I I don't see that my opponent's background is as focused in tax and financial issues as mine is.
Okay, that's fair. I apologize for putting you on the spot there, but
My mother, she's listening somewhere, and she would want me to be
yeah,
polite.
say something nice. Yes.
Mhm.
Well, but I think it's fair to say I've had the same discussion with a few other of the candidates this year, where you look at the background of the two candidates and you just go, well, the choice is obvious. I mean, we're not talking about party here. We're talking about who's got the background to do the job. And yours just seems to me to be so much further down the road than Miss Ball. So I wanted to bring that up. Now, I'll ask you the same thing that I've asked some of the other down
Yeah.
ballot candidates.
Yes.
I ran for office some years ago. It was a local race. I knocked on doors for like 8 months. I don't think you're going across the state knocking on doors. So, how are you running a statewide campaign, especially since it's your first one?
Sure. We're working very hard. we one thing we've tried to do is to take a little bit of a different and more memorable approach. We have a 1993 RV,
Mm-hmm.
and we are going to all 120 counties, which is, we actually just today went to county number 75.
Mm.
And so will make it. We'll get to all of them. And we're sometimes we're sitting down and maybe we're meeting with party folks. Sometimes we're just able to have a cup of coffee in a diner and talk with people. But I think human beings appreciate being met where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, and the fact that we're doing it not in a fancy way, in a very in a way that I think just appeals to everyday Kentuckians. I think that's something different, and we're documenting all of that with a very active social media campaign. We're documenting when we're in counties, what we're up to. We're trying just to look at it. We're the just grassroots. I mean, we have probably the kind of the most endearing is that a friend, a retired teacher friend of mine, he has 120 composition books, one for each county. And, we're keeping track of who we talk to, and, following up with those, with those people, that's, you have to be creative as a down ballot candidate. You really do. You have to be resourceful. You have to be creative. And that's what we're trying to do. And we're trying to make every opportunity count. We're trying to.
What kind of response are you getting? So you're out in this RV and you're stopping at the local Hardee's or, whatever the case may be, and you walk in and say, "Hi, I'm Kim Reeder. I'm running for auditor." So what's the typical, or is there a typical response?
We're very unassuming when we come in. We don't, we're just talking with people. Maybe we're talking with them about their dog. And then we get into issues of what office I'm running for and why it's important. And we stay very positive, and we're just having conversations. Really, the same way you'd have a conversation with any human being. And it is true that we're directing those conversations eventually towards, being able to talk about the auditor's race and the office, and why I believe I could serve well in that office.
You said you very active social media, which I'm assuming. What sort of traction are you getting there? Facebook, Twitter, what kind of response are you getting?
We're Facebook, Instagram, some Twitter. We're not certainly not but post. We're not tweeting all the time, but we're seeing a lot of the increased momentum from when I look at the beginning, some of our first posts to now. We're getting, as we go to each county, right? We meet folks who we eat and shop at local businesses, and we tag them in our posts. We're trying to, that's another way of engaging in this, the age that we're in. That's how you engage folks. And so,
are you getting much? So there's two responses I want to ask about. Are you getting much of the "I'll never vote for a Democrat, you're the devil, get out of here"?
No.
Okay.
No.
Are you getting very much of the "I'm a Republican, but I'll vote for you"?
I have heard more of the latter than the former.
Okay. That's a nice politically safe way to put it. I like it. I'm real intrigued by your RV tour. I think that's a very cool idea, and particularly for some of the rural counties where they never see a candidate.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's impressive to them. So is there a debate? Is there going to be any sort of debate for down ballot people?
It's my yes. KET. I think we'll be having debates. It's my understanding for each of the constitutional offices.
Okay, that's good. You may have to get a little more willing to do some compare and contrast at that debate.
Well, is it? Well, I may, and I can tell you that I will continue to be polite because I am willing to point out differences. I am willing to use my analytical skills. I am willing to analyze. At the end of the day, on November 8th, I have a daughter and many former students who look up to me, and they look to me to set an example. And they will not see me be mean-spirited. They will not see me be negative. That's not the way that's not when I was their teacher. That's not the way they saw me encourage them to behave. And that's not what they'll say in me. But I'll use my analytical skills.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I just think that you are so much the obvious choice.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Well, I just think I don't think I'm being kind. I mean, you're talking about analytical skills. I think I'm being truthful. You are by far the obvious choice for this office. So I always have two questions that I wrap up an interview with a candidate with. The first one is there anything you wanted to talk about that I haven't asked you?
Yes, thank you for including that question. One area that I think we see these days that's come up so much, where I do think the auditor could play a really critical role and quickly, is we're seeing all of the issues with the busing problems in Jefferson County, with the just shortages, delayed school dates, because of teacher shortages. As you probably know, in 1989, the Kentucky Supreme Court held in the Rose case. It was a sweeping educational reform, decision that really is looked to as an incredible decision that other states have looked to when they've reformed their educational systems.
Right.
But the heart of that is this idea of it's numbers, right? That's the disparity, right? The disparity between the more affluent counties as far as property taxes, revenues, and the poorer counties. And what the Kentucky Supreme Court said in 1989 was that the disparity that existed was unconstitutional under the Kentucky Constitution. And that's where we have now the funding, the what's called the SEEK funding, the distributions that are made to all of the counties. And now we have gotten to a point where that disparity that was found unconstitutional in 1989, we've exceeded that just numerically. Right. And so one thing the auditor could do would be to audit those SEEK allocations, determine whether that look at those numbers, see what the disparity is. There's the auditor would just then have the ability to report on that, to write a report on it, to make sure the public knew about it. But that's important information. That's so critical, for I'm most familiar with Eastern Kentucky, where you would find a lot of the counties in that lower quintile. That's important information, but it's not just those counties, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Knowing that our public schools can have the resources that the Kentucky Supreme Court has said they should have to educate our children, that's a really important issue. I know that analytically. I also know that in my heart, because I know that that's the way my mother and myself were able to create a better life for our family. That's an important issue. I'd love an opportunity to focus on it.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Again, the performance audit function.
Yes.
I think, and I appreciate you bringing it up, because I was frankly not thinking about it. And I think that has huge implications for the performance of our state government.
Yes.
All right. Last question.
Okay.
So you are out in your RV and you've parked in front of my house and you're knocking on my door, and I ask you, why should I vote for you? What is your answer?
I am the candidate who is exceptionally qualified to do a good job working for you. And you can look at my actions, choices that I've made in the past. You can see that I care about people, and I'll care about you and every other Kentuckian in the same way.
Cool. Good. I appreciate any candidate that can answer that in 2 sentences. So that's a really good point. Kim Reeder, outstanding tax lawyer, a teacher, and now a candidate for state auditor in Kentucky. Yes. Good luck to you, and thank you again for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
That was Kim Reeder, who is running for state auditor this fall. Rarely have I interviewed somebody whose qualifications and backstory are so impressive. She would make an excellent auditor, and I hope that she wins the race, because I think she would serve the people of Kentucky very, very well. We have interviewed almost all of the people on the ticket this year. I hope you will go back through all of our Moving Kentucky Forward interviews and take a listen. And remember, if you're a paying member of Forward Kentucky, there is also a transcript available on the site. Thanks for watching or listening, and we'll see you next week.